Hey besties! My name is Angie, this is my channel, maybe I'll read today. And today, I have something mean to say. Because this year has been one of the most disappointing reading years of the very recent past. And I can acknowledge that maybe it's a me problem. Maybe escapism isn't really working out for me the way that it used to. Maybe my mind is boggled down by world and political and social events. That being said, I have something mean to say. Because while generally my reading year has been kind of slow, it's been kind of not super great, even more specifically, every 2025 book release that I've read so far has been a major freaking dud. And we could go down a rabbit hole trying to figure out why there's a sudden decline in the quality of book releases and how that kind of relates to the increase of social media surrounding reading and it being less about the quality of the books that you read and more about the quantity of the books you read, and how that's really pushing publishers to just publish book after book after book because people want more content, people want more hauls, people want more reviews and shit. And so maybe you can argue that one of the core issues is actually the TikTokification of reading rather than like dissecting a piece of media for everything that it's worth and how it relates to our society at large. Maybe. I haven't done enough research about that, and so we're not going down that rabbit hole today. Today, I'm just gonna complain for like 15 minutes. I hope that's cool. So starting with the first book that disappointed me, we have Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. And this was a huge bummer because I like Grady Hendrix. I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of his, but I would say I'm a moderately enthusiastic fan of his. I can appreciate what he does in all of his stories. I can very much appreciate his writing style because it feels very much like a screenplay. It's so easy to visualize what he's putting down on paper, and you can easily see how any of his works can be adapted into some form of visual medium. But this book just missed the mark for me. I feel like it was such a huge disservice to make it a paranormal horror kind of situation. Basically, in this book, we are following a young girl. We're in Florida. It's the 60s and or 70s, I don't actually remember, and she gets pregnant. And her family finds out she gets pregnant, and they send her down to this house of wayward girls. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically a thing where if you had an unwanted pregnancy, you could go to this house, you could go through your pregnancy, you have the baby gets adopted by some other person, and then you get to return to your life, consequences free-ish. It was a thing that was being done in the 60s and 70s when abortions were like not super readily available and or safe for people, and it was an option. It wasn't a great option, but it was an option if you didn't want to have the baby that you were pregnant with. So her family sends her there. It's a really strict house. They like control everything that these young girls do, and these young girls are feeling incredibly powerless. That is until they come across this librarian who promises them power through the form of witchcraft. And then we kind of follow them as they fall down this rabbit hole, blah, blah, blah. I would have loved this book if it stayed within the historical fiction realm. The addition of the witchcraft felt like Grady Hendrix remembered halfway through writing this book that he was a horror writer. And he was like, oh shit, I need to add some ghouls, I need to add some demons, I need to add, what's women? Witches. And then he just did that. I can see where he was going with that, but it was like white feminism 101 takes with this like relationship with women and witchcraft and power and influence. So even when he tried to make some parallels with like the primary plot, it just felt like half-baked and loosey-goosey. And in fact, in his author's note, Grady Hendrix wrote that the witch plot line was added after the first draft was made. So I can't imagine what the conversation was with his editor or his manager or whoever is like making these kinds of decisions, but like it almost feels like whoever made that decision was like, hey Grady, we can't break you into a new genre, you gotta stick what you know, you gotta make this a horror in some capacity. And like whoever did that, I just want to exchange a few words with you, because like why? It was just a major missed opportunity in my opinion. I feel like Grady Hendrix really could have done something here, and then he fell back on the safety net of a horror, and the safety net didn't even provide any safety for this story. The second book that I have beef with is Blob, A Love Story by Maggie Sue. This is another book that I was highly anticipating. I mean, honestly, you could say this about all of these books, but this one felt like it was made for me. We're following a girl. She's kind of hit rock bottom, and then she finds a blob outside in the street, and she decides to take that blob home, and in taking care of it, she kind of molds this blob into the perfect boyfriend, only to realize that one, men aren't perfect, and in fact, in a lot of ways, the exact opposite of perfect. But two, that she can't create a person to fix her problems for her. She has to like work within to be able to grow as a person. And again, in theory, this book would have been perfect for me. We have sad girl representation, we have blobs, we have monster fucker agendas, and yet this book was so boring. It felt so predictable in that sad girl fiction kind of way that it made the blob man boring. Can you imagine creating a story, a blob, a man that you can mold into whoever you want it to mold into, and it still comes out boring? Maybe that's the point of the book. But either way, I just remember it feeling so tedious to get through this book. I honestly don't even remember the actual specific gripes I have with this book because it was so boring. It was so forgettable. It's kind of a problem when you have a book that has a very unique premise and yet I can't think of any specific details about it because it might as well have just been the same blob man. It's just, there's nothing there. It's empty. Again, is that the point? Is this a life imitates art kind of situation? I don't know, but I'm not happy with it. The next book on this list is unfortunately The Unworthy by Agustina Basterica. Another book that I was really anticipating, especially because Tender is the Flesh is one of my favorite books of all time. And then I read this book and I was like, oh, okay. Cool. So The Unworthy is a post-apocalyptic dystopian kind of situation. We're following a convent that lives isolated from the rest of the world. This convent is full of like nuns who do a bunch of like weird, brutal ritual shit where women are brutalized and tortured in the name of purity. And to be honest, its commentary feels very surface level. And honestly, of all of the books on this list, again, this is probably one of my biggest disappointments. Like, Tender is the Flesh is such a layered piece of text to me. There was so much there. I remember the first time I read it, I was like literally annotating every other line. Like, that's how deep and how nuanced and how layered it is. And then when I picked up this book, it was just, yeah, I get it. The way she over-explained things, the way she was so obvious about what she was doing, it just felt like she thought I was stupid. And I thought me and Augustina had like a little bit more of a relationship going. However, I will say, I kind of understand why she would do that. Because if I was her and I wrote a book like Tender is the Flesh and it went viral for all of the wrong reasons and people walked out of that book thinking that it was an extreme horror about animal rights, when in actuality Tender is the Flesh is a book about late-stage capitalism, the power of language and word choice in creating a new normal, which is a phrase we're all familiar with, and exploring how far, how quick people will ignore horrific things happening in society in order to ensure their own individual safety and security. Like, I would be peeved too, because I'm writing a book with so much sauce in it and you're just walking out of it like animal rights, and also how fucked up was it that that dog died that one time. This is a whole other tangent about Tender is the Flesh, but if you read that book and the only problem you had was with the dog dying, when it's a book about cannibalism, like people are being breeded to be turned into special meat, and that was fine to you, and you didn't bat an eye for that, but one dog dies and now it's a DNF, I think you need to reflect, reprioritize your principles. I don't know. Anyways, my point is, if I wrote a book that was so layered, so nuanced, and people walked out of it with surface level US-centric takes, I would be so annoyed. My next book would be dumbed the fuck down so that hopefully you guys can actually get it this time. So again, disappointing because I just wish she had a little bit more faith in me, but in this case, I understand why she would make the moves that she made. Next book on this list, I have no explanation for the actions that this author took in this book, because this book is Victorian Psycho by Virginia Feito. This was one of the most stupidest books I've ever read. In this book, we're following Winifred, who's a governess. She gets hired to help out this family. They're awful, she's awful, everyone's awful. And then nothing really happens for the first like 80 pages, and then the last 15 pages, like everything happens. And I think that's the biggest problem that I had with this book, just like the fact that nothing happened. Because this book is called Victorian Psycho. In theory, and I guess in practice, like Winifred is crazy. She's evil. And throughout the book, like, I will admit, yeah, she does some weird things. She says some questionable stuff, but she's not like psycho until the last 15 pages. And by the time we got to the last 15 pages, I was already checked out. I just didn't care what was happening. So like, all of that action meant nothing to me. The story and the characters just felt super one-dimensional. It just felt like a shitty creative writing short story that's like somehow got published. It was the biggest culprit of telling and not showing us, especially in regards to Winifred's like character, because I cannot emphasize enough, she is not doing much for the majority of the book, but you get random conversations between random characters that are like, Winifred is weird. She's crazy. I wish I heard that too, and I wish I experienced some of it, considering we're in Winifred's POV, and yet she hasn't really done anything. I guess I'll just take your word for it. Like, why would you lie to me, random side character? I also hated the tone and the voice in this book. Like, not only is just like Winifred just an annoying character, but this book felt too modern. It felt really out of place because this book is supposed to be in the Victorian age. It's Victorian Psycho. And I don't know, you could tell that Winifred knew what an iPhone was. You know what I mean? Like, it's like one of those period dramas where like they casted the wrong guy. And especially when Winifred would like break the fourth wall and speak to the reader. And I guess this is like an instance to show that she's psycho because she's like talking to like an unnamed audience, blah, 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 blah. But it just felt like an episode of The Office. And I was like, okay, wrap it up. I don't care. I can also acknowledge that maybe this type of horror is just not my steez, you know? Like, I obviously didn't like Mayfly. I didn't like this book. Like, maybe again, I'm the problem. Maybe I was setting this book up for failure by picking it up in the first place. Like, I was not the target audience because I like my horrors to be a little bit more gothic, to be a little bit more atmospheric. And this is obviously super surface level, super one-dimensional. And who knows, maybe it's by design that it's one-dimensional. Maybe that was a choice that Virginia made. I don't know. I just thought it was bad. The next book is The Lamb by Lucy Rose. This book follows a mom and daughter who live in the woods. They are cannibals. It's a really toxic, codependent relationship. And then a woman joins their household and things escalate, things get worse, things get evil. Than they already were. Again, this is another book that feels like it would have been tailor-made for me. We have mother-daughter toxic relationship. We have cannibals. We have themes of isolation. We have themes of desire and obsession, etc., etc. All things that I enjoy reading about. And yet it was another slog to get through. Like, don't get me wrong, there were elements of this book that I really enjoyed, but it all just felt like I've read this before. It didn't feel like there was anything new in this story. And it felt like it was desperately trying to make things new, and in trying to make things new, it just felt more like same from everything else that I've read in the past. And after watching Sam's video, Sam from Super Blumper, I disliked this book more. Their analysis, their alternate ending, like really emphasized how predictable and how safe this book was in its storytelling. They created an alternate ending that was like so much more emotional, so much more impactful, that like the more I thought about the actual ending of the book, the more the actual ending kind of upset me. It was a bummer. I feel like there's a lot of potential for this story, and the author just wanted to make it super safe. The next book is Julie Chan is Dead by Lian Zhang. This is a book that I just finished, and it actually inspired me to make this video because I was like, fuck, how are all of these books disappointing? What is going on this year? But in this book, we're following a young woman named Julie Chan. She has a twin sister. They were separated at birth, and her twin sister is a known influencer, and Julie Chan is trying to get by in life. She's not as wealthy. She's not as well off. She's not as privileged. However, when her influencer sister dies, Julie sees this as an opportunity to have a little bit of a taste of luxury, and she assumes the identity of her dead sister. And then we explore the dark underbelly of like social media and influencer culture, parasocial relationships, addiction to online validation, etc., etc., etc. I really liked that part of the book. I thought that was really cool. I thought it was really neat. Apparently the author had like a short time stint as a skincare influencer, so she kind of has like the background knowledge of it. And like, if it was more of that, if it was more exploring the benefits and consequences and hindrances of social media, of depending on an audience for a livelihood, that would have been really interesting for me. That would have been a 5-star. Like, I love stories that explore the pros and especially the cons of like pop culture, parasocial relationship kind of shit like this. However, we divert from all of this really cool philosophical, like cultural critique stuff and go into like silly mode in this book, because we find out that Chloe is part of this like very elite, very secretive influencer group, and every year they go on a private island to like disconnect to reconnect is how they phrase it. And when they entered this island, I was like, okay, interesting. Now we're going down this like don't blink or blink twice, that movie starring Channing Tatum. I don't remember what it's called, but like we were going into that direction and I was like, okay, this is interesting. That movie did that really well. Let's see how you're gonna tackle this. Unfortunately, this book didn't tackle it as well. And then we go down this thing about like cults and like eldritch gods or something to that effect, and they completely lost me. By the time they started eating mice and making sacrifices, I was like, okay, so we're done here. Nothing matters and this is stupid. Julie is not a likable character. She's not a super redeemable character unless you put her in a situation that is so silly, that is so over the top, that you kind of have to like look past all of her faults, because what the cult is doing is a lot worse. Maybe my issue with this is that sometimes as an author, sometimes as a storyteller, sometimes as a culture, we have this obsession with redemption, and we have this obsession with making a hero out of everyone, and like maybe we don't have to do that. We have one last book on this list, and it's not even a disappointing book. I actually enjoyed a lot of it, and it's probably, as far as like ratings go, one of my more highly ranked books this year, but there's just a few things that I wish like didn't exist, and so that's why it's on this list. And that book is Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This is my first Stephen Graham Jones. I enjoyed it enough that I'm interested in reading his other works, but again, there's just something about it. There was exactly two things about it, exactly two people, that I didn't really care for and I wish didn't exist in this book. But Buffalo Hunter Hunter is set in the early 1900s. We're following a Lutheran pastor, priest, preacher. I don't know the difference between those three words. I tend to use the word priest, but I know it's different depending on the denomination you are in. But it's a guy, and he does church, and he meets a Blackfeet man named Goodstab, and Goodstab asks to make a confession. Through these confessions, Goodstab shares his life, and more specifically, the fact that he's a freaking vampire. And he talks about how he became a vampire and ultimately what he does with this curse of immortality in order to avenge and protect his community, and why he decides to do that, and everything in between. Goodstab's point of view, his chapters, were the best part of this book. Unfortunately, Goodstab shares this book with the priest and with the priest's descendant. And those two characters are so annoying. Imagine you're reading a chapter of like a really interesting, really layered, really like cool vampire who's killing a bunch of white people, and then you turn the page and you're in the POV of one of those dumbass white people. Like Arthur, the pastor, idiot. An idiot by design. There's a good reason why he's an idiot and a coward and a loser, but just reading his chapters were so tedious and so annoying. And then the book is bookended by the POV of his descendant in modern times. And somehow she's worse. The last 50-ish pages where it was just her point of view was so boring, was so corny, was so just like annoying to read. And like, again, this is probably by design, because in a lot of ways, they are cowards, losers, idiots who benefited off of genocide and colonization and white supremacy. So it's like, yeah, of course they're gonna be annoying. Of course they're gonna be unlikable. Of course. But it doesn't mean I want to read in their point of view. It doesn't mean I want to be in their world. I already got enough of that at work, you know what I mean? So this book was fine the way that it was written, but it would have been really good if it was just Goodstab's point of view. Like, I feel like we didn't even need mention of how Arthur or his granddaughter was feeling. Like, who cares? I had another point to make and I forgot it. So I guess that's it. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you for letting me be a little mean today. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a great day. I hope all your projects are going well, and I'll see you in the next one.